Welcome back to the bench. I'm Judge Lisa. I have presided over cases of passion, of madness, and of desperation. But the most terrifying crimes are those executed with patient, cold intelligence. Today's case, the State versus Marlon Thorne, was the trial of a perfect neighbor, a perfect friend, who concealed a life of devastating rot. This case haunts me because it proved that the people we trust most are often the architects of our worst nightmares. The victim, Eleanor Vance, was a woman who defined loyalty. When her husband passed, she was left with nearly $2 million and a need for companionship. Marlon Thorne, her next-door neighbor, stepped into that void perfectly. Marlon was the kind of friend we all wish for: impeccable manners, reliable, and an unshakable presence. For 2 years after Eleanor vanished, Marlon was the lead mourner, the chief comforter to Eleanor's children. He was the absolute portrait of faith. But when the forensic accountants discovered Eleanor's fortune was being systematically drained into offshore accounts, the facade crumbled. Marlon was arrested for larceny and murder. His defense, however, was immediately shocking. He didn't deny the theft of the $1.8 million. He admitted it, but he argued that Eleanor had asked him to do it, to manage the money for her supposed secret lover who she had run away with. Marlon claimed he was simply protecting Eleanor's scandalous secret.
I knew the lover's story was garbage. The money trail was too direct, the movements too frantic. But what was Marlon doing with all that cash? That became the first great mystery. We expected luxury, a new boat, lavish holidays. What the prosecution revealed was far darker and more disturbing. Marlon Thorne wasn't spending the money on himself. He was funneling nearly every penny into a highly secretive, internationally renowned private medical facility. Not for his wife and not for his children. The money was paying for the lifelong care of his estranged, institutionalized father, Peter. Peter, now 75, had suffered severe Parkinson's disease years ago, requiring specialized, expensive European care that had financially crippled the Thorne family. This was a tragedy Marlon had meticulously kept secret from everyone, including his own circle of friends. Marlon had lived under a mountain of debt and shame for years, meticulously hiding his father's condition while maintaining the image of suburban prosperity. He wasn't driven by simple greed. He was driven by a desperate filial terror of letting his father's advanced care lapse. He needed Eleanor's money to sustain his double life. This didn't excuse the theft, but it added a profound, heartbreaking complexity to his motive. It made the jury, and me, see him not just as a monster, but as a terrified man making a monstrous choice.
With the motive established, the question remained: how did he commit the murder? The turning point, as in all great cases, was the small, seemingly irrelevant detail: the broken alibi I mentioned earlier. Marlon claimed to have been at a town council meeting the night Eleanor vanished, but phone tracking proved he was not. Eleanor, in her incredible generosity, had signed Marlon in late, covering for her friend's secret errand. The alibi was built entirely on Eleanor's loyalty. But Detective Ramos brought forward the final, terrifying evidence. He wasn't tracking the money anymore. He was tracking water samples. The police finally recovered Eleanor's body from the river reeds, and the autopsy confirmed death by drowning. But the toxicology report contained the ultimate surprise. Eleanor had a trace amount of a powerful, fast-acting sedative in her system. She hadn't been murdered in a struggle, she had been incapacitated. Ramos then revealed the true, sickening nature of Marlon's final betrayal. He presented a small, silver locket found in Eleanor's jewelry box. It contained a tiny key. That key fit the lockbox of Eleanor's medication.
It turned out years ago, Marlon, the good friend, had convinced Eleanor to give him a spare key, claiming he needed it in case Eleanor ever had a health emergency and couldn't reach her pills. The truth? Marlon had the key for years, waiting. On the night of the murder, he simply walked over, put a sedative in Eleanor's bedtime tea, acting as the solicitous friend, then waited until she was unconscious. He wheeled her out in a garden cart he claimed to use for composting, dumped her body in the river, and then drove to the council meeting to ask Eleanor's note-taking friend to fudge the final minutes of the sign-in sheet. The most potent tool in the commission of the murder was not a weapon or a financial statement. It was the key given to him by the victim herself.
Marlon Thorne was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and grand larceny. The defense's compassionate motive was shattered by the cold, calculated method. The 5 years of loyalty were merely a prelude to the final, lethal betrayal. The law could not forgive the murder, even if the money was intended for a father he loved. My sentence reflected both the calculated cruelty and the ultimate violation of trust. I sentenced Marlon Thorne to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, demanding full restitution of the stolen funds. But the final measure was aimed at his secret life. I ruled that the assets seized must be placed in a court-appointed trust specifically for the care of his father Peter. Marlon was stripped of his freedom and his fortune. But the one thing he murdered to protect, his father's long-term care, was secured by the very justice system he had tried to circumvent. As Marlon was led away, he looked back at me, his eyes filled not with anger, but with a terrifying, hollow despair. He had failed to control the narrative, failed to control the money, and failed to control the law. He spent 2 years proving he was the most trustworthy friend in the neighborhood, only to have the key, the tea, and the note all expose him as the ultimate predator. That is the kind of case that reminds me daily, sometimes the greatest monsters in the world live right next door.